The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Street as Dr. Amara Johnson stepped out of her luxury sedan, briefcase in hand. At 34, she had already made history as the youngest black woman appointed as senior state prosecutor in the district. But today, in her casual Saturday attire of jeans and a simple sweater, she looked like any other woman running errands in the upscale neighborhood where she'd recently bought her dream home. She had stopped by the corner store to grab coffee and pastries for her new neighbors, a small gesture to continue building relationships in the community she now called home. The store owner, Mrs. Chin, had greeted her warmly, as she did every weekend morning. As Amara walked back to her car, arms full of bags, she noticed a commotion across the street. 2 police cruisers had pulled up to the Johnson residence, ironically sharing her last name, though they weren't related. She could see Mrs. Johnson, an elderly white woman, gesticulating frantically and pointing in her direction. Officer Bradley Mitchell stepped out of the first cruiser, his hand instinctively moving to his radio. His partner, Officer Sarah Davis, emerged from the second vehicle. They'd received a call about a suspicious black woman casing houses in the neighborhood, with the caller insisting she'd been watching homes and clearly didn't belong there. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you," Officer Mitchell called out as he approached Amara. Amara set down her bags carefully, her prosecutorial instincts immediately kicking in. She'd handled hundreds of cases involving police procedure, and she could already see several red flags in their approach. "Good morning, officers. How can I help you?" she replied calmly, keeping her hands visible. "We've received reports of suspicious activity in the area." "We need to see some identification," Mitchell demanded, his tone authoritative and cold. "May I ask what specific suspicious activity I'm alleged to have committed?" Amara asked, maintaining her professional composure despite the growing knot in her stomach. Officer Davis stepped closer. "Just cooperate and show us your ID. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Amara felt the familiar sting of racial profiling, something she'd experienced despite her education and position. "Officers, I live here. I was simply getting coffee from Chen's Market, as I do every Saturday morning. I'm happy to show you identification, but I'd like to understand the specific allegations." "Look, lady, we don't have time for games," Mitchell snapped. "The caller said you were casing houses, looking into windows, acting suspicious. Now are you going to cooperate or not?" Across the street, Mrs. Johnson stood with her arms crossed, clearly satisfied with the scene unfolding. Several other neighbors had emerged from their homes, some recording with their phones, others simply watching. Amara reached slowly for her purse. "I'm reaching for my wallet now," she announced clearly, a practice she'd unfortunately learned was necessary. As she pulled out her identification, she also revealed her state prosecutor badge. "Here's my driver's license and my state identification," she said, handing over both items. "I'm Senior State Prosecutor Amara Johnson. I live at 1247 Maple Street, the house right there," she pointed to her home, "and I was purchasing coffee and pastries to welcome my new neighbors." Officer Mitchell's face went pale as he examined the credentials. Officer Davis leaned in to look, her expression shifting from suspicion to alarm. This appears to be..." Mitchell stammered. "Legitimate?" "Yes, it is," Amara said firmly. "Now, I'd like to understand the specific details of this complaint. Who called, and what exactly did they claim to observe?" The officers exchanged nervous glances. They both recognized her name now. She'd prosecuted several high-profile cases that had made local news. "Ma'am, we received a call from a concerned citizen who reported suspicious behavior," Davis said, her tone now markedly more respectful but still defensive. "I see. And what specific behaviors were reported?" "Because I've been in this neighborhood for exactly 12 minutes. I parked in front of Chen's Market, entered the store, made purchases, exchanged pleasantries with Mrs. Chen, and walked directly back to my car. At what point did this constitute casing houses or suspicious activity?" Officer Mitchell cleared his throat uncomfortably. "The caller stated that you appeared to be..." that you were looking at houses in a way that seemed what, Officer Mitchell? Amara's prosecutorial voice was now fully engaged. That seemed criminal because I'm black in an upscale neighborhood? No, ma'am, that's not. We were just responding to a call. Officers, I prosecute cases involving civil rights violations and police misconduct. I'm intimately familiar with proper procedure, reasonable suspicion, and constitutional protections. Based on what you've told me, you had no reasonable suspicion to detain me, no articulable facts suggesting criminal activity, and no legal basis for demanding identification. By now, a small crowd had gathered. Mrs. Chin had come out of her store and was shaking her head disapprovingly at the officers. Several neighbors were openly recording the interaction. Amara continued, I'm going to give you both an opportunity to handle this professionally. I suggest you return to the complainant and explain that watching someone make a legal purchase at a local business does not constitute suspicious activity. I also suggest you review your department's policies on racial profiling. Officer Davis stepped forward, clearly wanting to de-escalate. Ma'am, we apologize for any inconvenience. We were just doing our job, responding to a call. Your job, Amara replied firmly, is to serve and protect all citizens while upholding their constitutional rights. Your job is not to harass law-abiding citizens based on unfounded complaints rooted in racial bias. She gestured toward Mrs. Johnson, who was still standing across the street but looking considerably less confident. I want to speak with your complainant. Officer Mitchell looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, I don't think that's necessary, Officer Mitchell. I'm not requesting permission. As a citizen who was just subjected to what appears to be discriminatory police action, I have every right to face my accuser. As a senior prosecutor, I have a professional obligation to understand how this situation unfolded. The officers reluctantly accompanied Amara across the street to Mrs. Johnson, who suddenly seemed very interested in her garden. Mrs. Johnson, I believe you called the police about me, Amara said, her voice calm but authoritative. I'm Amara Johnson. I live at 1247 Maple Street, and I'm also the senior state prosecutor for this district. Mrs. Johnson's face flushed red. I didn't know. You thought what, exactly? That a black woman couldn't possibly belong in this neighborhood? That purchasing coffee constitutes suspicious activity? I was just being cautious. There have been break-ins, have there? Amara asked. Because I've reviewed crime statistics for this area as part of my job, and property crimes here are well below the city average. So what exactly made you think I was a threat? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Mrs. Johnson looked down. I made a mistake. Yes, you did. You made a mistake that wasted police resources, violated my rights, and perpetuated harmful stereotypes. But more importantly, you made a mistake that could have escalated into something far more serious. Amara turned back to the officers. Gentlemen, I want your supervisor here. I want a full report of this incident. And I want your department to understand that this cannot happen again. Officer Mitchell nodded reluctantly. Yes, ma'am. I'll call the sergeant immediately. As they waited for the supervisor, more neighbors approached. An elderly black man introduced himself as Dr. Robert Hayes, a retired professor who lived 2 blocks over. Ms. Johnson, I've been in this neighborhood for 15 years, and I still get questioned when I walk my own dog, he said quietly. What you're doing right now, standing up, using your position to demand accountability, it matters for all of us. A young white woman with 2 small children approached nervously. I'm sorry, she said to Amara. I'm Jessica Matthews. I live over there. I saw what happened, and it wasn't right. I've been wanting to come introduce myself since you moved in, but I was shy. I'm glad you're our neighbor. Within 20 minutes, Sergeant Patricia Williams arrived. She was a black woman in her 40s, and her expression was grim as she assessed the situation. Prosecutor Johnson, she said formally. I apologize for this incident. Can you walk me through exactly what happened? Amara provided a detailed, factual account of the events. Sergeant Williams took notes and asked pointed questions of both officers. Officers Mitchell and Davis, you'll both be writing detailed reports about this incident, Williams said firmly. And you'll both be attending additional training on community policing and constitutional rights. Prosecutor Johnson, would you be willing to speak with our department about proper procedure and community relations? I'd be happy to, Amara replied. But I also want to address the broader issue here. This wasn't just about improper police procedure. This was about a community member who felt entitled to sic the police on someone based purely on racial bias. She turned to address the growing crowd of neighbors. I moved to this neighborhood because I believed in building community. I believed that we could all live together respectfully, regardless of our backgrounds. But what happened today shows that we have work to do. Mrs. Johnson stepped forward hesitantly. Ms. Johnson. Prosecutor Johnson. I owe you an apology. A real one. I was wrong. I let my fears and assumptions guide me instead of common sense and decency. I'm sorry. Amara studied her for a moment. Mrs. Johnson, apologies are a start, but they need to be backed up by changed behavior. I challenge you to examine why you assumed I was a threat. I challenge you to get to know your neighbors before you judge them. Over the following weeks, the incident sparked community conversations about race, prejudice, and belonging. Amara organized neighborhood meetings, bringing together longtime residents and newcomers. She used her platform not just to demand accountability, but to build bridges. Officer Mitchell requested additional training and eventually became an advocate for reform within his department. Officer Davis started volunteering with community outreach programs. Mrs. Johnson, to her credit, became one of Amara's most ardent supporters in the neighborhood. She helped organize a community garden and made it her mission to welcome new residents personally. The incident was covered in local media, with headlines reading "Prosecutor turns police stop into teaching moment" and "Community healing after racial profiling incident." But for Amara, the real victory wasn't in the headlines, it was in the small changes she saw daily: children of all backgrounds playing together in the new community garden. Neighbors checking on each other during storms. Block parties where Mrs. Chen's dumplings were served alongside Mrs. Johnson's apple pie and Dr. Hayes's famous barbecue. 6 months later, as Amara sat on her front porch with her Saturday morning coffee, she reflected on how a moment of injustice had become a catalyst for genuine community building. Her briefcase sat beside her, filled with cases she'd won and changes she'd implemented in the prosecutor's office. But perhaps the most important victory was the simple fact that she could sit on her own front porch, in her own neighborhood, without anyone questioning her right to be there. The fight for justice, she knew, wasn't always won in courtrooms. Sometimes it was one conversation, one relationship, one moment of courage at a time. As Dr. Hayes walked by with his dog, he waved and called out, "Good morning, neighbor." And in that simple greeting was the recognition she'd been fighting for all along. Not just as senior state prosecutor Amara Johnson, but simply as a woman who belonged exactly where she was.